Love. We've talked about love on this channel before. It usually leads to some bad things. But today, no murders. Last week's episode destroyed me a bit, so I need a break. But we still have some unhappy people, and hopefully you'll want to hear a bit about their unhappiness. Today, we're going to talk about 3 different couples who had some issues with keeping things in the dresser drawer where they should be kept. Nope, it's the ever marriage-destroying thing of wanting what, or rather who, you aren't supposed to have. Now remember, back in these times, the 1920s in particular, divorces were hella hard to get. You had to have your ducks and evidence in a row, and you had to have some money for lawyers, and even then, as I've seen, you may still not get your divorce. You may be told to work it out. And trials like today could sometimes drag on for a bit, like for years. Our first subject, Ada Babb. We have one Ada Babb, a New York artist model who married Charles Babb, a chemist, in 1918. Young love. Ain't it a kick in the pants? Well, Ada was enticed by a wealthy middle-aged man named Clyde Black, who manufactured something or another and was doing well. She ended up going to Bermuda with Clyde while she was married to Charles. Charles may be a chemist, but there appears to be no chemistry there with Ada anymore in 1924. However, Charles Babb, the husband, is suing Clyde for stealing the affections of Ada away from Charles, and he would win with a judgment from the jury of $46,000. People either want to know what Ada thinks or she's just telling the papers, but anywho, we have this from the horse's mouth. The horse in this case is Ada. She would say, quote, $46,000. Isn't that dreadful? That dumbbell isn't worth $46,000 of anybody's affection. The affection I had for him wouldn't be worth anywhere near 46 cents. Charlie Babb married me in 1918. He had a chemical job, but it wasn't much use to us as a young domestic couple because he kept losing it. Why, the very first year of our marriage, he lost 15 jobs. We kept moving from one set of furnished rooms to another, switching from Brooklyn to Baltimore and back again. Less than 12 months after our wedding, he came to me and made a suggestion. He thought, he said, that since we hadn't much money, I ought to look around and get something to do, end quote. Well, she would. She became an art model. Now, she wasn't posing nude or anything like that, if that's what you're thinking, though she would claim that her husband told her she should so they could make even more money. Then Charles became obsessed with the idea that a rich old man would come and take her. Well, perhaps Charles was psychic because she would be introduced to Clyde Black. At one point, Clyde was planning a trip and asked her along. She claimed she asked her husband, and he said he had no objection. She went along with Clyde and his mother and sister. Ada said, quote, that my husband didn't care enough about me to forbid my traveling around the country in an automobile was a shock to me. My illusions about his love were getting feebler and feebler. When we got back from the trip, I packed up my clothes and went home to Mother in Flatbush. I've been there ever since, end quote. So along with this apparent lack of care about who she spent her time with, again, this is according to Ada, he cared too much about money and about quick distilling, a way to synthetically age liquor, trying to make 6-year-old whiskey in 2 minutes. Now, about the trip to Bermuda. So she said that, quote, yes, Mr. Black was a member of our party, which included another couple. They said in the lawsuit that coming back, Mr. Black occupied the same cabin that I did, end quote. Now, she doesn't just deny that he was in her cabin. She actually said, quote, do you suppose I was in any position to know or care who was in that cabin? I was so horribly seasick that I wanted to die, end quote. So at this point in time, Charles won't give her a divorce, even though he said a lot of things about her, and he won the $46,000 from Clyde. Ada continues, quote, but I surely am in a fine fix all around. And why? Simply because I told the truth. Most men are silly, just silly. Even if Babb did give me a divorce now, I would never marry again for anything. Not even if it was the most wonderful man on earth. Not even if he had $46,000 or even $46 million, end quote. Now, don't speak too soon. $46 million in 1924 can make one forget a lot of issues. So what happened with these two? Whatever it was, the papers didn't find it interesting enough to talk about. Our next subject is Elsie doula. So next we have a doula. No, not someone that helps you give birth. This is a couple called doula. Elsie Hinman Doula wants a separation from her husband, Robert B. Doula Jr., plus $5,000 alimony per year. It's March 1925, and she's going to get it. The separation and alimony, that is. She had been receiving $35 per week, but Justice Proskauer of New York said that evidence showed the doulas had been subsisting on $22,000 per year. Robert, the husband, according to the judge, was, quote, an idler living on the bounty of his family, end quote. He felt, the judge that is, that Elsie had become accustomed to more wealth in her daily life and so should get higher alimony, $5,000 annually instead of approximately $1,820 per year. Ouch. How are they surviving if he ain't doing much? Well, Robert's dad is the former vice president of the American Tobacco Company. The couple are living on a 17-acre estate in Tuckahoe, New York, given to Robert by his dad. That's how. Oh, okay, so that's it? Oh, dearie, no, you know better than that. We have Elsie doula, the wife, suing her in-laws for $250,000 for alienation of her husband's affections. Yowza! August 1924. So we're going to just back up this truck a little bit. How exactly did Elsie's in-laws alienate their son's affection for Elsie? Elsie said it was by enticing him away from her and harboring him at their homes at Lake George, Tarrytown, and in Park Avenue, New York. The couple had been married in 1919 and all was grand, until his parents, quotes, conspired against her marital happiness and enticed him away, thereafter endeavoring to persuade their daughter-in-law to divorce their son, end quote. They would not tell Elsie where their son was. The in-laws would deny all charges. June 1926. Elsie was awarded a verdict of $100,000 from the jury today against Mrs. Josephine Doula, Elsie's mother-in-law. Robert's father, Elsie's father-in-law, who also was supposed to stand trial, passed away in April, so of course he's no longer involved in this case. Apparently, Mrs. Doula just inherited $2 million from the death of her husband. Supposedly, Elsie will now get a bit of a chunk of that. Apparently, this verdict was a bit of a surprise to some. Mrs. Doula's counsel twice tried to get the case thrown out based on lack of a case for Elsie. Justice Crane had overruled those motions. Elsie produced evidence showing that 2 years after her marriage to Robert in 1919, they lived happily together in that nice estate in Tuckahoe, living lavishly on $25,000 to $30,000 per year. Until Robert decided to leave her. The two of them went on an ocean voyage to Europe in 1922, as you do, and she said her husband spent the dough on a lot of liquor. Robert said no, Elsie was really vibing on the champagne, and at some point said that Elsie had hit him with an empty bottle while she was drunk. She claimed something similar, that he was constantly drunk. He beat her and hit her over the head with a bottle. What the hell? During a trip abroad, he also said that she, quote, caroused all over Montmartre, end quote. Mother-in-law said she, mother-in-law, did nothing. Now we're in early August 1926. That $100,000 nice pot of money for Elsie reduced to $10,000. Justice Crane ruled that if Elsie did not accept the reduced sum, a new trial would have to be ordered. This was all brought about because Mrs. Doula wanted to have the verdict set aside so there would be a new trial. Now, I didn't see any mention of Josephine Doula, or Elsie for that matter, after this in the newspaper, so I'm going to assume that nothing further came of this particular issue. Our last subject is Wilda Bennett. Wilda Bennett was an actress who got herself sued. We're in 1924. Again, who knew a century ago could be so saucy? Actually, over the last 40 plus episodes, I've learned that it was hecka saucy. Miss Bennett, age 29, is being sued by one Mrs. Catherine Fry for enticing away Mrs. Fry's husband, Charles. Catherine wants $100,000. Mr. Charles Conrad Fry is a well-known Kentucky horse breeder. Catherine brought to court various newspaper clippings and photos showing Fry and Bennett referred to as a married couple to each other. December 1924, Wilda wants to see a bill of particulars, aka all of the details Catherine is charging, regarding the case because she says she has done nothing wrong. October 1925. So we're already in the trial, and one Celeste Babon, former butler of Wilda's, said that Wilda would have intimate breakfasts at her Long Island home, and Mr. Fry was there clad in purple PJs. Catherine said she had made an application for divorce, but on the advice of her counsel, she instead is countering his suit as she doesn't want a divorce. In addition to Miss Bennett, another woman of note was an actress named Lillian Lorraine, who Catherine would say, quote, "He told me once that Miss Lorraine was the only sweetheart he had ever had," end quote. Charles had 2 apartments in New York. He had told Catherine, according to her, that she must never go to one of them, as he had people there gambling at all hours. Well, seeing his car in front of this one particular apartment, she went ahead and went to the door and heard Wilda's voice. Charles dragged Catherine out and down the stairs. Catherine's sister, Mary Pierce, would testify that Fry would have given Catherine $10,000 to divorce him. When asked where he would get the money to pay the $10,000, he said, quote, "Oh, from a girl," end quote, but later would deny he was talking about Wilda. We do hear from Wilda in court, and she said that she and Charles are nothing but friends. Quote, "What were your relations with Fry?" she was asked. "Friendly, always." "Ever anything more?" "Never." "Ever known as his wife?" "No." She said that Fry, nor any other man for that matter, had ever stayed at her home in Long Island. Unless her cousin and chaperone, one and the same, I think, was present. Fry, well, conveniently had a cottage across the street. Quote, "Did you ever live in that cottage?" End quote, Mrs. Fry's counsel asked. Quote, "Yes, at present," end quote, the actress answered with a tilt of the chin. She would later say that she was surprised by the court's gasping reaction to this response. Really? Surprised? She first met him in 1923 at a racetrack where he told her the name of a good horse and she bet on it, and it won. She then, quote, "told him to drop in to see me sometime," end quote. Mae West? Charles on the stand would deny the PJ breakfast party. Shown a picture of him with his arms around a young woman in a bathing suit. He denied it was Wilda, but couldn't say who it was, that it might be any one of a large number. District Attorney Edwards, quote, "Do you mean to tell me that you have had so many pictures taken with your arms around women in bathing suits that you can't remember who this one is?" End quote. Quote, "I'd hate to have to dig up all the girls I've been photographed with," end quote, replied Fry cheerfully. District Attorney Edwards, question, "When did Miss Bennett first learn of your marriage?" Answer, "She knew nothing about it until the papers were served in the suit." Question, "What was her attitude?" Fry's answer, "She did not seem to be interested in my being married. She said my wife's affairs were not her affairs." Question, "Do you mean to tell us that she did not want to know why you had not told her this before the trouble came up?" Answer, "She said she thought she should have known, but my being married made absolutely no difference to her." Apparently, Charles had a woman living with him for 3 months in one of his apartments. He denied it was Wilda, but again, wouldn't say who it was, and denied finally that Wilda had lured him away from his wife. Quote, "If any advances were made, I made them," end quote, he would state. October 24th. The verdict was sealed after only being debated among jurors for 30 minutes, as Justice Faber had hit the bricks that Friday afternoon and was out of court. Dude, same. 5 o'clock hits and I cannot be found. So we're going to have to wait over the weekend. But apparently 2 jurors, all of whom were composed of married men, were seen approaching Catherine and smiling when her attorney stated quickly, "Gentlemen, do not discuss your verdict under any circumstances." When Justice Faber charged the jury with their duty, he said that they must not allow any opinion as to improper relations between Wilda and Charles to influence their decision, going on to say, quote, "The question for you to decide is whether Miss Bennet was the pursuer or the pursued," end quote. Regarding damages, he said that no matter how wide a man's experience might be, it was almost impossible to put a money value on love. Yet they would do it. So what was decided? Catherine Fry was awarded $37,500, ordered to be paid to her by Wilda Bennet. So she didn't get her whole requested $100,000. And during the week the trial was in court, Wilda and Charles would come into the courtroom together, her arm in his, and sit together. So everyone has very different feelings. Wilda, quote, "Verdict or no verdict, I know I am all right. Of course, I do not intend to pay it," end quote. Fry, who sat beside the actress, said, quote, "There will be an appeal. Don't worry about that," end quote. Mrs. Fry said she was too happy to talk. Quote, "I feel that my suffering has been somewhat allayed. The verdict shows that these things cannot go on unchecked in New York," end quote. It's only a couple of days later, Catherine's officially done with Charles and wants a divorce. Both had previously sued each other, but it never went anywhere. But once again, I don't know what happened. I would assume that Catherine probably would get her divorce, given how Charles just really seems over the marriage, and Catherine won her case against Wilda. Any take-home messages? Simply, don't get involved with married people. No matter what day and age you're in, it's probably not going to go well. So I'm not sure what we've got next week. I've got more love, alienation stories on the back burner, and of course, there's always more murders. We'll just have to see. See you.